And clear prop.
I'd been waiting weeks to say that because after two previous attempts failed to even get off the ground due to bad weather, I was finally underway on my epic 3-day trip from Heckfield on the Gold Coast all the way to Longreach and back. Day 1 was 3 legs, stopping at Chinchilla, then following the Warrego Highway west to Roma, and then on to Charleville for the night. Day 2 I followed the highway up to Tambo for a quick stop, past Barcaldine to Longreach for a visit to the Qantas Founders Museum, and then back to Barcaldine for the second night. And after 2 full days of near-perfect flying weather, Day 3 is where things got interesting. With low cloud and dodging showers, I followed the Capricorn Highway from Barcaldine to Emerald, then tracked direct to Biloela and on to Caloundra before the short coastal hop back to Heckfield. The aircraft I'm flying is a Sling 2, a 2-seat light sport plane, just like that one, and this particular one, Sling 8340, is the same one that I did my first solo in a year before.
Do you feel like you can go up by yourself?
Yeah.
Yep.
Since then, I'd built up 85 pilot in command hours, and the purpose, well, the excuse for this trip, was to get that number over 100 so I could start on my RA-Aus instructor rating. It was a Friday, and the military restricted zones were active, so I went south around the Amberley RAF base. Going the other way past Archerfield around the north side of Amberley was an option, but that would only have cut a couple of minutes off this leg, and there's a lot less open country up that way. I've been pretty obsessed with flying into as many airfields as possible in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, but this was the first time I'd been to Chinchilla.
Chinchilla traffic, Sling 8340, 10 miles southeast at 6,500 inbound, estimated circuit time 38 Chinchilla.
Chinchilla Aerodrome.
Aerodrome CTAC.
So coming into Chinchilla, that recorded voice, the Aerodrome Frequency Response Unit, is often a clue that you've got the place to yourself, but it turned out there was another light sport aircraft, a Technam, inbound for a landing ahead of me on runway 14.
Chinchilla traffic, Technam 7440 overhead the airfield. We'll be descending non-active side of 14 and looking to join me for crosswind runway 14 Chinchilla.
14 active. Okay.
And as you can see on the Oz Runways log here, I still flew overhead to check the windsock myself before descending to circuit height on the non-active side of runway 14 to join crosswind.
Chinchilla traffic, Sling 8340 overhead 3000, descending on the non-active side to join crosswind to runway 14 Chinchilla. Chinchilla traffic, Sling 8340 joining crosswind runway 14 Chinchilla.
Chinchilla traffic, Technam 7440 backtracks 14 for the apron, Chinchilla.
Chinchilla traffic, Sling 8340 turning base runway 14, full stop Chinchilla.
The guys in the Technam turned out to be an instructor and his student from Redcliffe. We had a good old chat. It was their first time in Chinchilla too, and we all agreed that the Aero Club here deserves top marks. It's a fantastic place to stop. They've got avgas, clean facilities, a vending machine, everything you need. Anyway, after that quick stop, I was on to the next leg, which was west along the Warrego Highway to Roma.
Perfect day. Almost no wind, so we can take off on 14. Bit of a crosswind, but almost nothing.
Chinchilla traffic, Sling 8340 entering and rolling runway 14 for departure west Chinchilla. Here we go. RPM's good. Airspeed's alive. Crosswind from the right.
The conditions were still absolutely ideal, and this leg to Roma following the Warrego Highway was pretty uneventful. But coming into Roma, I did get to see a couple of pretty cool aircraft preparing to depart. The first was an Augusta rescue helicopter which started taxiing just as I joined the circuit.
Roma traffic, helicopter rescue 566 Augusta 139 medevac, shortly taxis runway 18 Roma, departure to the north 2500 Roma.
Roma traffic, Sling 8340 joining crosswind runway 18 Roma.
Roma Airport has two taxiways, one for light aircraft and one for the big guys. It was no problem at all to pull the Sling up and vacate that runway quickly so the Augusta could get going without delay.
Nice one, thanks mate. Traffic Roma helicopter rescue 566 entering, lining up runway 18 departure to the north 2500 Roma.
There was also a Rex Airlines turboprop leaving just as I pulled into the general aviation parking area.
Roma traffic, Rex 5727 Saab 340 IFR, taxiing for runway 18 for a departure to the east for Brisbane. Roma.
Roma was another great setup. It had easy access through the gate to the facilities and to the passenger terminal. Of course, I already knew that from the Aero Club's website, which gave me some pretty useful local knowledge. So after a bite to eat and a look around and a check of the weather, I jumped back into the Sling for the final leg of the day, west to Charleville. Once again, another fairly uneventful leg following the Warrego Highway and watching the terrain turn from brownish green to greenish brown. Clouds finally started to appear, and by late afternoon the temperatures started dropping really quickly. Charleville's another great facility with a luxuriously huge runway, but the highlight here definitely has to be Southwest Air Service. These guys were awesome, helping me fuel up the Sling and pointing me to a nice convenient tie down for the night. And they even lent me their courtesy car. I had planned to walk a kilometre or so to a nearby hotel for the night, but that car was definitely welcome. I can't recommend Charleville highly enough if you're looking for somewhere to fly to or if you're just passing through. Day 2, I woke up to nearly perfect weather once again, so I got a nice early start. The plan for today was to follow the Mitchell and Landsborough highways up north for a stop at Tambo, then overfly Barcaldine to Longreach for a special stop, which I'll get to, and then back to Barcaldine to refuel and tie down for the night. I followed highways for most of this trip for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as you get further west, there's not a lot of geographical features to navigate by, and sealed roads are a great visual reference. And secondly, if something did go wrong and I had an unscheduled landing, then I'd have an easier time of it being closer to a main highway. This trip was about the journey as much as it was about the destination, so spending a bit of extra time in the air to play it safe was a win anyway. My first stop for the day was Tambo, and one of the things it's known for is a monument just north of the town which marks the site of the first crash of a Qantas aeroplane back in 1927 with 3 fatalities. Tambo aerodrome itself was really well maintained, but as you can see there's not a lot here, just a waiting area and a few tie downs. So I stretched my legs, had a look around and then jumped back into the Sling to continue on to Longreach. And if you're wondering what the big deal is about Longreach and why so many pilots make the pilgrimage out here, well, it's usually to see the Qantas Founders Museum. Coming into land at Longreach, you can't miss it. Over on the right, as I was on final on runway 04, are 4 historic airliners under a massive shade structure next to the museum building itself. And one thing I found here was that as smooth as the air had been up at 8,500 feet, as I got closer to the surface, wind gusts really started to pick up. Taxiing into the apron, it wasn't that 100-year-old Qantas hangar that gave me goosebumps, but that 747 parked next to it. Echo Bravo Quebec, also named the City of Bunbury, is an aircraft that I've got a special connection with. Back in the day, my dad worked for East West Airlines and later Qantas, and I was lucky enough to fly in Echo Bravo Quebec in 1981 from Sydney to San Francisco via Honolulu, and then home again. Back in those days, a 7-year-old kid was guaranteed to be invited up to the cockpit on a long-haul flight, And I distinctly remember the flight engineer proudly showing me how he could light up his panel like a Christmas tree. So thanks, Dad, for all of those awesome experiences, as well as your excellent record keeping. It was great to see the old girl again. Anyway, after a few hours reminiscing, it was time for me to get back into the Sling. Clear prop. And the only flying left on day 2 was a short 40-minute hop back the way I came to Barcaldine.
Longreach traffic, Sling 8340, taxiing to runway 04 Longreach. Longreach traffic, Sling 8340, entering runway 04 for departure east Longreach.
Longreach traffic, Tango Queensland near several runways, Longreach.
Longreach traffic, Sling 8340, rolling runway 04 for eastern departure, Longreach.
PM is good. Airspeed's alive.
Longreach traffic, Sling 8340, departing the circuit downwind runway 04, tracking east, climbing to 5,500, passing 1,800 Longreach. Barcaldine traffic, Sling 8340, 10 miles west at 4,500 on descent. Inbound, estimate circuit time 06, Barcaldine.
Barcaldine CTAP 126.7.
Overfly 2,400, circuit height 1,900.
Barcaldine traffic, Sling 8340, overhead 2,400, descending on the non-active side to join crosswind for runway 01, Barcaldine.
Barcaldine CTAP 126.7.
Turning base.
Barcaldine traffic, Sling 8340, turning base, runway 01, full stop, Barcaldine.
Barcaldine's another place with a huge runway, 1.7 kilometres in fact, so I landed pretty long and still had a long way to taxi to the apron at the far end.
Barcaldine traffic, Sling 8340, clear of all runways, Barcaldine.
It was a Saturday afternoon and I didn't see anyone else at the airport, but the automated fuel bowser there worked perfectly and I got the Sling filled up and tied down before walking the couple of kilometres to town for a pub dinner and a motel for the night. Next morning, day 3, after a relaxing evening of checking the weather every 5 minutes, I got back down to the aerodrome just after first light for another early start.
Barcaldine traffic, Sling 8340, rolling runway 01 for departure east, Barcaldine.
RPM's good, airspeed's alive.
The weather forecast today hadn't really changed much in the past 4 days and it turned out to be spot on. I was expecting the low clouds and a strong headwind, with conditions improving throughout the day as I progressed east towards the coast. Now if you know your meteorology, you'll know that the winds up higher are coming from a more northerly direction, which would have helped a lot, but those low clouds had other ideas. So there I was, beating directly into a 35 knot headwind, with a ground speed getting as low as 65 knots, which wasn't much faster than the grey nomads on the Capricorn Highway down below me. There was a cloud base at about 4,000 feet, which was fine, but a few times I came across these broken patches as low as about 2,500. I had preset personal minimums. If at any stage I couldn't maintain at least 2,000 feet altitude, 20 miles visibility, and within gliding distance of a clear field next to the highway, I'd do a U-turn and head back west to land and wait it out. And to be honest, for this entire leg, and for most of the day really, right up until I could see the ocean, I wasn't expecting to make it home that day. The other thing on my mind during this first leg was the Drummond Range, which is a small area of high terrain west of Emerald and right along my path. If the cloud was too low over that range, I'd have to divert about 20 miles to the south to get around it. But it all worked out in the end. Finally, after well over 2¼ hours in the air, covering a mere 158 nautical miles, I joined the circuit at Emerald. And there's something really cool about flying into an airport that you've been to as a passenger on a jet. So after a bite to eat, and some maths to work out if that extra fuel I'd burned with that headwind was going to change my plans, I climbed back into the Sling and headed off on the next leg to Thangool aerodrome near the town of Biloela. The sky cleared up a lot for this leg, so I was able to get to a decent altitude. And that, combined with my new southeasterly heading, meant that the headwind was no longer working against me and my ground speed was back up to about 100 knots where it should be. At this point I was starting to think I might even make it home. Although 10 minutes out of Biloela, I did have to duck underneath some broken cloud, and that was a sign of things to come. Landing at Thangool aerodrome was pretty uneventful, though there was a crosswind to deal with, and like every other aerodrome I've been to on this trip, it's a great regional facility. So after a quick check of the oil, fuel and weather, I set off for Caloundra. After climbing out, I found myself underneath that broken cloud layer, but despite having to stay down low with a bit of turbulence the whole way, I still had 20 plus miles of visibility in all directions and plenty of open fields below. So on I went. My brain was pretty well occupied on this leg, and I completely missed the fact that I passed my 100 hours as pilot in command somewhere about here. Mission accomplished. Just short of halfway through this 2-hour leg, I passed Gander Aerodrome, and from that point forward, with the sky ahead looking darker, I was pretty sure that that's where I was going to be spending the night. Still, as long as visibility continued to exceed that personal minimum of 20 nautical miles, and I continued on. I did make a couple of course corrections though to avoid showers and high terrain. Approaching Gympie Aerodrome was probably the closest I came to changing my plans. I caught the edge of a shower, and there were a couple more showers visible up ahead, but then as I was overhead the airfield, I could clearly see the Glasshouse Mountains and the coast beyond, so I pressed on to Caloundra. I'm no stranger to Caloundra Aerodrome. I've been here half a dozen times before, and it's good to be back into familiar territory. As usual, there were a couple of training aircraft in the circuit, so I slotted in there for a landing on runway 05. After checking fluids, fuel and weather once again, it was time for the final flight of the trip, and one that I've done half a dozen times before. 40-minute hop down the coast via Stradbroke Island to Heck Field. So after 7.4 hours flying on day 3 and 16.6 hours total for the 3-day trip, I landed back at Heck Field on runway 10. In those 3 days, I'd seen more of my home state of Queensland than I had in the past 20 years. My dad was there to meet me and hear all about it too, which was awesome.